Hare Krishna. Continuing on with our 50 years in ISKCON series. We've done, I think 23, 24 parts to this now, and we've come up to the year 2000. So we'll try to do between 2000 2005. We'll start this era, this time in our lives and in the movement, what was going on. But let me first offer my respectful obeisances to all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Vansha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhuvyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. And to Srila Prabhupada, who's given us everything. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Tinamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Vicharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paskacha Desatarane. So now at this time, I'm about 50 years old. Been going through lots of things which we've tried to describe just in brief. So we have been now in Mayapur, living in Sri Mayapur Dham for 4 or 5 years. And I just have to take a few minutes to describe what was normal, a normal yearly occurrence in Mayapur. But to someone living outside of Mayapur, these experiences were anything but normal, quite extraordinary. And that was the Mayapur floods. It just was such an extraordinary time, extraordinary experiences, that I want to describe it as there's just nothing like it anywhere. It's unique to Mayapur. And during these years, it was pretty much a sure thing that there would be a flood every year. And it was just a question of whether it would be a big one or a small one. And every year that was the talk of the town. Are you staying for the flood? This year is supposed to be the biggest flood of all time. And so many speculations were always, would always abound during these times. And we experienced a number of floods, and so after so many years, it's kind of just a merge of all of them. But I'll just try to give a little general description so you get the gist of what this was. It was really something. The first year that we were in Mayapur, when we heard that there's a flood coming, it sounded scary. And we'd already made plans to go elsewhere. So when the water started coming up, we had to make a quick decision to leave earlier than expected. And the water had already come up a couple of feet high. And looking out the window, I could see snakes swimming around. And that was it for me. Okay, let's go. We quickly got on a rickshaw, we piled up our suitcases on it, and the water was already covering about 3/4 of the wheel of the rickshaw. But our determined rickshawala, he pushed us through the water, and we just made it out in time. And that was a relief. But for the next years, we decided to stick it out. So when all the water starts rushing in, it gets scary, but also exciting. Everyone immediately snaps into action. Stockpiling food, candles, and everything on the ground needs to be moved to higher ground. Everything in the homes, everything in the shops, and everyone works very quickly to help all of this get done as quickly as possible. And also massive sandbags have to be laid out in various locations to try to minimize the flow and all the cows have to be relocated to the Jagannath Mandir, get them to higher ground. And it just is quite amazing how much gets done so quickly and generally in very good spirits. You know, it's actually a time when the community comes together and forms pretty strong bonds. You know, everyone's, you know, for the most part, pretty friendly and helpful. And the Grihastas, we could choose to try and stay in our homes, or we could take rooms in the guest houses. You know, so sometimes, I think the first couple of years we stayed home. And I have to say, it was actually fun. It is impossible to describe the amazing feeling of being submerged in the Ganga. You're just in the Ganga. And you look out the window and all you can see is water, and you can just jump right off the veranda into the Ganga. It is such a special feeling that it's very, very difficult to put it into words. It's so extraordinary. You're just immersed in the Ganga's embrace. And it could be a real spiritual feeling to it. So, of course, it's also very dangerous. You don't know what is beneath the water, and you know, it's incredibly destructive. But for the children, it was the best time of the year. They loved it, and they always look forward to it, and there's no holding them back. However concerned we might be about snakes or live wires, it's just they were all going to go in that water. There's no stopping it. And amazingly, the electricity stayed on a lot of the time. I don't know how that was possible, but also like the sabji man and the milkman, they would just, you know, put their baskets on their head or their, you know, their buckets and wade through the waters to bring the goods to everybody. You know, the cows are still going to be giving milk, and that doesn't stop. So they've got to, you know, they've got to sell it. And I remember, you know, the milkman saying, "Yes, I will keep coming until up to here." And then, you know, boats will go around, and devotees also would get their own makeshift boats or rafts and paddle through the water, checking on devotees that are in their homes. And the temple management just did a remarkable job. You know, they would just work full steam ahead, arranging to take Food for Life out on boats to stranded villagers, which was a very, very rewarding activity. Devotees love to do that. And so much appreciated by the villagers. But at other times, other floods, we chose to move into the conch building, where you know, all the devotees were in there, all our friends, and so it became like one big family, and we would be eating together and going to darshan together, and the management would build bridges so we could go from one building to the next to take prasad, and it was just absolutely a riot to attend the temple programs. Imagine, you know, swimming into the temple room, swimming through the water, and everything would just go on, you know, up to a certain point. Everything would go on just as if it was any other day. They'd take Prabhupada out and put him on the head and walk him around through the water and Guru Puja and the whole thing. It was really something that is just, you got to be there to feel it, to experience it. It's really something. I mean, sometimes there was word of very interesting things happening, like, I mean, I don't know, it was, you hear so many things during those times that supposedly there was a large snake that used to come into the temple room, and it would swim in, and then it would go around Lord Nrsingadev, and then it would just swim out. Circle him, and so it was a very amazing experience. And we'd have classes held on the roof, and when the water would get too high to stand in the temple room, then everyone would stand up on the platform in front of the deities. So that was such an amazing and intimate darshan. Nothing could compare with what it was like. We're just, a few feet away from Radha Madhav and the Astasakis. I mean, amazing. And really nothing like that, I think, exists in this world. It's just such an extraordinary, that's why I'm explaining it, because it's really something special. And there were special perks. After Mangalarti, they would pass out the Mangal sweets to those who had braved the waters to get there. And there was a lot of opportunities, special opportunities for deity services. And, just for the kids, it was the greatest fun, swimming all day. And they just all looked forward to those times, However, after a few days, the novelty of it all would start to wear off as the Ganga water became more and more dirty, and devotees often started, especially the kids, started to get sick. And so I'm describing it, like it was this great fun, but, and that was there, but it was a terrible, terrible devastation for so many, especially for the locals. So many homes destroyed, so many animals died, all the gardens devastated. But it was truly amazing to see how accepting and how resilient the villagers were. They just moved themselves up onto some higher road and, sit on their haunches waiting for the water to go down patiently. Pretty amazing. And the aftermath, there was just so much to do. They would have to put powdered bleach sprinkled everywhere throughout the compound to try to avoid disease, and just endless replanting and rebuilding and repainting everything, and so much expense to rebuild. But it would happen every year, just remarkably fast, and then just very quickly done, and that's that, as if nothing even happened. You could hardly tell, So one year we were traveling in the West when actually the biggest flood that had occurred up to that point happened. And it had never reached to the first floor where we lived. There's a ground floor, and then high up. The buildings are built high for this purpose, so it hadn't reached to the first floor prior to this year. So of course we'd gone away, and we didn't put anything away because, didn't expect any water to come in. But this year the water came into our apartments, about 5 feet of water. And we just heard about it. I think we were in Australia. And, I was just envisioning all our belongings, one thing after another, lost, floating in the mud and the water, and, just mentally one by one, just letting go of everything. Oh, well, everything's gone, computers, fridge, stove, books, file cabinets, Krishna, everything gone. It was a very interesting mental experience of whether it was possible to detach. Kind of did, yeah, just, well, what to do? You have to. So when the water went down, we came back to Mayapur. And we were planning to stay in a guest house till we could, rebuild our life. And on the way, I said, well, let's just stop and see how bad the damages are. And so we stopped and went into our apartment, and we were just shocked to see our apartment looking practically as it was, as it always was, with the exception of a water line across the room, you know, halfway up the wall. And we were just stunned. And we then found out that some very incredibly kind devotees who knew we were away, they broke open our door and moved everything up high, and they saved everything. And not only that, but they hired some workers to clean it all when the flood was finished and put everything back. So Jai, all glories to the merciful Vaishnavas. That was a wonderful surprise. Anyway, so some descriptions of the floods. But Mayapur life, it was going well for us. At some point, I'm not very good at the dates, the years, you know, but around this time, Hari Sori became a co-director for some time, about a year or so. And the experience didn't really turn out well, and yeah, he quit that. And he felt encouraged to just steer clear of management from there on out. So he left that, and it was necessary. He would, you know, we have to live, so he would go off to Australia frequently and sell paintings, you know, to maintain our little home in Mayapur. But Rasarani, my daughter, was happy. She is now going to the Sri Mayapur International School, which was run by a very dedicated and determined, I think Lalita's Australian, or is she British? I'm not sure. But Lalita, who had 4 daughters, I think, and she was a well-trained teacher, very tough lady and hard worker. And it's just amazing that she was able to run that school and develop it pretty much single-handedly. And the environment there was very beautiful. Maybe it wasn't the highest or best education in the world, but it was definitely adequate, and the kids liked it. It was filled with a lot of really diverse and lively international kids. So, you know, we were living our standard devotee lifestyle for the times, temple program, daily greeting the deities, Guru Puja class. You know, that's the beauty of being in the Dham. It's so easy to do your spiritual life. It just, you know, so we loved that, you know. It's just such a supportive environment, you know. It's not hard, not hard like often it can be in the West, you know. But I remember, I just talk about things that are just, you know, like family life, what were we going through, you know. I remember we had always gone to Srimad Bhagavatam class, taken our daughter there, and her friends were there. But, you know, about the time, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old, I started to feel that attending the Bhagavatam class for the kids that age wasn't really the best use of their time. I mean, that was just my own feeling. I thought, well, this class is not really geared for kids, so it's often just becomes like an arts and crafts class for the kids, you know, they're coloring and stuff. And of course, you know, it's a purifying vibration, and, you know, no harm in just sitting there, even if, you know, the vibration is going in. But at a certain point, I thought, well, they could be learning, you know, they could be learning more. So I decided to start doing a Bhagavatam class at home for us, Ronnie's friends, you know, maybe 7 or 8 kids. And I tried to teach them, you know, transcendental topics. I'd never done anything like that before, so it was all new to me. But try to teach in a way that they might easily absorb things. And I found it very enlightening and very amazing to see just how much young children can really comprehend. They can. I was surprised to see how easily they just absorb things and understand them. You know, the whole idea really for me was to get them to think. To me, education means not, indoctrinating them or telling them what to think, but, teaching them how to think. And I remember doing some classes where we do things like, I wanted them to understand the 3 modes of nature. And so we had this yellow, red, and blue ropes that represent the modes, and then the kids would tie each other up in one or the other color. And then, the kid that's tied up in that color, then they have to say, well, now I'm in this mode, so this is what I'm going to eat, and this is the kind of music I'll like, and this is what I want to talk about, and this is what I want to do, depending on, being tied up in goodness or passion or ignorance. And it was so fun, and at the same time, it was profound, and I could see that the kids, they were just getting it so easily that even when things were going on, when we weren't talking about that subject, they'd say, oh, you're just in passion. You're just in ignorance. And, it's a big topic, children's education, huge. I won't go into it now, but, Prabhupada did say that he wanted to create a revolution in education. And I think that statement has to be explored very, very deeply on into the future. And it is a huge, huge, most important project for future generations to develop. I mean, it may take generations, but I am convinced that we could have a very remarkable alternative educational system. But, the devotees and the parents and the leaders, they really have to want to see that happen and apply a huge amount of energy to develop it. I pray that that will happen in the future. I mean, we have been disappointed in so many ways up to this point, but still the vision is there, and still it's relevant, Now for myself, around these times, I started having significant health issues, menopause time, physical limitations. This had always been a major challenge throughout my life. Even in my youth. So there's, certainly karmic lessons for me in this life to learn around this. I had many debilitating diseases over the years, hepatitis and malaria and typhoid, and it took its toll. And I've just always had a huge battle with the lack of energy and extreme fatigue, Even after now, it's been 30 years of, getting up for Mangalarti daily, but still, for me, every morning is a struggle. And so now into my 50s, it became more and more challenging, and I didn't realize that a lot of pain I was getting was due to arthritis developing. But as devotees in these days often did, I didn't really look into it until it was quite severe, and I eventually was diagnosed with some pretty serious osteoarthritis throughout my body, as well as fibromyalgia, which is accompanied by chronic fatigue. So dealing with that was one of my challenges, a major struggle. And so somebody, you may be questioning, what is she talking about all this stuff? What is the value of all this mundane information? Obviously it's not of high spiritual value, but it is just giving some insight into the regular life of the ordinary devotees. And that is also part of our history. Most of us have fairly, ordinary lives. We're not all powerful preachers, and We're not all doing, you know, remarkable services, but whatever we're doing, we have to figure out how to keep going in Krishna consciousness as we go through the different stages of our life and the different stages of ISKCON's development, you know. And we have to each learn how to apply the philosophy practically according to the time, the place, and the circumstances. So hopefully, you know, hearing about, you know, these kind of things, it has some value. But in any case, throughout these years, my service continued very regularly. My trips to Vrindavan twice a year, usually for 4 months of the year, 2 times, a couple of months around Gaur Purnima time, a couple of months down Kartik time, to keep all these outfits for various temples being churned out. So this is just a big part of my life service. And since it was a rather unique experience, not many others who were doing this type of thing at that time. So, you know, I just give some descriptions of my experience of this service, you know. Around this time, we started to have some trouble with the workers who were doing the embroidery work. They were trying to create a workers' union, and they were making some unreasonable demands. And they were led, I mean, they're simple people, so they didn't really know how to go about these things, but they were led by some political persons from outside Vrindavan who were just, you know, stirring up things for their own political purposes. So it was a concern for anybody that had any workers in Vrindavan. So I told Ashok that the only way to solve these problems would be if all the shop owners, all those that are hiring workers, if we all come together and make some united strategy. Now this was kind of unheard of. They were all competitors and, you know, didn't necessarily even like each other, but they were all worried. And so we had this kind of historical meeting at the Krishna Balaram Mukut shop, and they all came, all these people that did this type of work, all the shopkeepers, and that were doing embroidery work and had these kind of workers. So we had quite an interesting meeting, and we did manage to curb a difficult situation by working it out together. So that was a good thing. I doubt anything like that was ever done before or since. But somehow, because Vidya, who was running the Krishna Balaram Mukut shop, and I were foreigners, and we were women, you know, we had this kind of ability, special ability, that we could convince them of the value of meeting together, you know, so that was a good thing. I mean, probably most devotees, they see the outfits and they see the deities dressed every day without understanding how they become manifest, and how hundreds of, mostly, not all, but a lot of them are Muslim men, sit for 12 hours daily doing amazingly artistic varieties of embroidery work. Very talented men, and all men, but you know, it's very different in India. The artists are not valued as they are in the West. They are considered to have a low position, they get very low pay, and very little recognition for their art. But most of them do take some pride in their work. And so anyway, it was an interesting thing. One thing that happened at this meeting, there's a famous devotee named Lalit Prasad, Maybe if anybody's old enough, they would remember that there were these Lalit Prasad outfits in the early days that was a deity fashion in ISKCON temples. And Prabhupada liked these outfits, and they were made by this person, Lalit Prasad, who was a very highly respected Vaishnava. He wasn't just a deity outfit maker, but he was a very respected person in Vrindavan. And those outfits, they were made with a lot of sequins and ribbons and lots and lots and lots of little pleats, you know. So anyway, Lalit Prasad was there, and it was interesting to meet him. Actually, I had met him previously. But after the meeting, Lalit Prasad came to speak to Ashok, because Ashok had kind of been the main speaker organizing the meeting. And so afterwards, Lalit Prasad came in and he asked Ashok, he said, "Why do you say Sitala Prabhu?" As you know, he had mentioned me a few times in the discussions, so Lalit Prasad was thinking it wasn't right. And so it's just interesting. So not because it was like a male term, that it was meant for men, but because it was such an exalted title. He said, you know, Prabhu, like Nityananda Prabhu. And so he was like, you know, seeing this term as such an exalted title, that how is it you're calling her that, you know? So he was wondering, he was curious. And so Ashok explained to him. And I don't know how, he must have just picked up this on his own accord through the years, working with many ISKCON devotees and mostly ladies. And so he explained very clearly, straight away to him, he said, oh, no, in ISKCON, everyone is addressed as Prabhu. And he said, because they see each other, or they're trying to see each other like they are the servant of the other devotee, that you are my Prabhu. And so, first of all, I thought it was remarkable that Ashok had just somehow intuited, is that the word? You know, he just had figured out that that's what we do. And they all called us Prabhu, everybody, all those shopkeepers, because that's what we did. And that was why we did it. Didn't have to do with anything to do with gender whatsoever, nothing. So I thought it remarkable that Ashok got that. And so then Lalit Prasad, when Ashok told him that, he said, Lalit Prasad, he thought about it for a minute, and then he said, oh, well, that's okay then. That's very nice. and so he just, you know, he thought that was a good way for Vaishnavas to see each other and to address each other. And I wonder why it's so hard for many of our own devotees to comprehend this simple attitude. I don't know. But anyway, so Ashok, he's running this shop that we started, 30 years ago together. So we're kind of growing up together. And Ashok's probably, I don't know, maybe about the same age as me, or a little younger, a few years younger. And he belongs to an old Brijbasi family. So by this time, we've worked together for years, making, talking about Radharani's skirt and Krishna's shawls, and, doing this service for the Lord together. And he did see it like service. I mean, it's his business, but he was into it, and he was very devotional. And, he's a real Brijbasi. So I'd been working with him now, 20 years or so. And so through him, I witnessed what was starting to be common problems in Indian families. Of course, we know that the joint family is the social system that was in existence for generations, hundreds, maybe thousands of years, in many of the old cultures, not just in India. But I was seeing there were often starting to be very serious cracks in this system, especially for the young women entering a family. Actually, it's a topic of many Indian movies about the cruel mother-in-law, or, it's a common theme. So when Ashok got married, he was younger, and the other, his brother's wives and his mother didn't like her so much. They thought she was too dark. That is like a big deal in India, the shade. I hardly saw a difference. But to them, this was like an important thing. The shade of your skin. Surprising, huh? But so she was not treated well, and she was given more work than the others, and it was not very nice. And but she had a couple of kids, and now she was pregnant with her third, and she became very ill. I think she had hepatitis. And when Ashok tried to take care of her, bring special food or attention, the rest of the family ridiculed him for being, too attached, or, whatever. So to make a long story short, she died, and the baby also died due to, really maltreatment. And I'd come to see that this is not such an uncommon problem. And now Ashok was left with 2 small children. And, because of the way the family system is, he's the younger brother, so, he had nobody to talk to. And he was in a total crisis. So he knew that he needed to remarry, but how could he bring another woman into that home? And so he talked to me like his sister. We discussed at length, and we agreed that he would have to do something, which was kind of unheard of at the time. He would have to move out from the family home in order to remarry, which he eventually did. And it was quite a story. But I bring this up just to show how changes were beginning to happen in the culture. When we start losing the heart of the culture, the tradition, of having a joint family, it was meant to facilitate the well-being of all the family members. And when it's done with love, it is a fantastic support. And I have seen living examples of amazing how families continue to do this in a wonderful way, even today. But, when good character is lost, then whatever the system may be, it just, and this could be a wonderful system, but without proper character, it sometimes was becoming very stifling and brutal. And we saw how India was changing in this way around these times, big time. Some say that it's because of the Western influence coming in, and certainly, that's part of it. But I think it was just the progress of Kali Yuga was entering strong and hard, and I saw so much change in Vrindavan, and in general. We saw around this time that many old families were breaking up. there was a competitiveness amongst the brothers and that was increasing. I saw this happening with the Jaipur Murtiwalas. You know, over the years, brothers started fighting and competing and breaking off and starting their own shops. And the same thing happening with some of the shopkeepers in Loy Bazaar. So, you know, the breakdown of long-held traditions was definitely happening. Joint families had been the social security system in India for generations. Families supported each other in every way throughout life. But now we were seeing the family breakdown, both, you know, in the West in its own way, and in the East in its own way. So now we find that, you know, that what happens, especially in the West, we've become completely dependent. Our social system becomes dependent on the government instead of the family. And loving care kind of gets taken out of the picture to some extent. So, I mean, there are still many remarkable families. I've met Indian families where this joint system has been very beautifully executed, creating loving, protective, and secure environment. It can be wonderful. But when the system is corrupted, it can just be brutal, sometimes cruel and abusive. So actually, it's not the system, but it's the people themselves who lose their sense of dharma or their integrity or their character due to the influence of this age. They become greedy, and character becomes lost. And in such a condition, no social system works well because of the hearts, the dirty hearts of the people. And, you know, I'm just mentioning this as an observation of these times, particularly of how things were really changing, not just in the West, but very much so in India. Very big changes happening around this time. So, going on about this service that I did in India, being a woman and doing this, especially before I started it when I was single, it could sometimes be fraught with dangers. As I think I explained in another video, that I often had to go into Delhi for materials and to pick up funds. And it was a bit of a process during these times to even get funds. You know, you had to go through a whole process to bring money into India. So one time I was at a bank and I was at the counter picking up quite a large amount of money. So, you know, the teller handed it to me and I was counting it in front of the teller. And he said very strongly, he said, "Quick, put that money in your bag, don't show it." He said it so forcefully that I didn't question him, I just stuck it in my bag quickly. And then I was like, "Why are you saying this? I have to count it." And he said, "Yeah, there's a place you can count it." But then he explained, he said that there's someone hanging around the bank with yogic powers. And if they can see the money, they can retrieve it from you. But they have to see it clearly. And you know, I was shocked. Here's this straight-laced bank teller telling me about this yogi fellow with full acceptance that such powers exist. Only in India you get this kind of thing. And he said it had already happened to others. And so maybe that's a good lesson if you're traveling with funds in India. Be careful, don't flash it around. But it's also an interesting insight into the knowledge the common man in India has. You know, here's just a simple bank teller, but he has no doubts about the eternal nature of the soul, and no doubt that there are people with powers beyond our comprehension is just, a no-brainer. So different from the West. And it was an interesting experience. I had to go in the back room and they let me count it where nobody could see. But another difficulty, sometimes it was dangerous part of this service, was just to go to Delhi. For years we went on the early train. It was still unusual for a woman to be doing these things on her own. And we would have to, quickly jump off the train at Bengali Market as it slowed down going into Delhi. And from there we could get a quick bite and then rush like mad for the rest of the day to get all the work done, traveling from one side of Delhi to the other, and just making it back to the train station in time for the last train to Mathura. But as the years passed, another change in India, as it became impossible to do this. There was just way too much traffic to get around quickly. When I first came to India, there was just, there were so few cars. But the increase of the cars was just crazy. So the traffic, at some point, we just couldn't do it, like rush in and rush out and do things. So we started taking taxis to Delhi. And this wasn't as deluxe as it sounds like, because the taxis at that time were usually pretty rundown and would often have problems on the way in or flat tires. I remember one trip we had 3 flat tires on the journey. Anyway, and also driving, like during wintertime, we were often caught in very thick fog. And one time our horn went out, and it was like the horn is the most important thing on the vehicle, if you know what it's like to drive in India. And so my friend Vidya was with us, and she had to stick her head out the window and just bang a plate with it. She had a spoon or something. She was making noise because we had no horn. And I was hanging out the other window, because the driver can't see anything. There's so much fog, and I'm looking, on the ground, and I'm telling him I can see where the road is ending, and I'm yelling to the driver, Tora Dina, Tora Baya, go a little right, go a little left. So it was pretty crazy, these journeys. Not so easy, not so smooth. And on many occasions, I experienced how serious trouble can suddenly arise in India so quickly. One time I was in the wholesale market in Naisarok and Chandi Chowk, and suddenly everyone just started scattering, running in different directions, and all the shopkeepers started pulling down their shutters, locking up. I had no idea. It was going so fast. I didn't know what was going on. And one kind shop owner, he called to me and yelled. He said, quick, come inside, come in my shop. So, I just ran in, and he slammed down his metal shutters, and he locked it. And inside, he explained that there was some kind of, terrorist attack, scare that was happening. Something awful was going on out there, So we had to just sit in the dark. The electricity went off in this closed up shop, and at least I had time to make him a life member while we were sitting there. And eventually everyone started just slowly opening up again, and life just went on as if nothing had happened. And this reminds me of another very harrowing experience. I should have told it earlier in the 80s, but because it was so extraordinary, I'm going to digress a little bit and tell that story. Because it was quite an amazing experience. I was on a flight coming from Europe, arriving in Delhi. And as we approached Delhi, I noticed that all the airline stewardesses were kind of whispering together. And, I was like, what's going on? Looked like something was up. And then I noticed that we were circling and circling and circling Delhi for a long time. So I was, what's going on? And then finally the pilot came on and he made an announcement. And he said that the Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, had been shot. And so we were waiting to be allowed to land, and we don't really know what will happen. Maybe you'll have to just stay in the airport. So this was pretty shocking, but I really didn't have any idea of what a big deal it was. We weren't told any details, but once we were in the airport, we were told we couldn't go out, and I think we found out that she hadn't just been shot, she had been killed. And she had been killed by a Sikh, her bodyguard, I believe. And ironic. After, an hour or so in the airport, they said, well, there'll be one bus and it will go into some of the big stop at 3, I think, big hotels in Delhi. One of them being the Imperial Hotel in Janpath. And that people could sign up if they wanted to go out at their own risk. And so I was familiar with the Imperial Hotel. I used to go there to pick up Lakshmi, and so I was aware that there was a taxi stand in front. So we drove on this bus through these completely deserted streets all through Delhi. It was very, very eerie. And, then we were at the hotel, we heard more about the details. And I realized that I had a small window of opportunity to get out of Delhi before likely all hell would break loose. I have got to get to Vrindavan now. I felt absolutely desperate. And I thought of going on the Taj Express at 7 on the train, but I got this loud Super Soul message, no, not the train. And I remembered I had read a book called Freedom at Midnight, which explained about the terrible and brutal murders and slaughter of thousands during partition time. And much of that happened on the trains. So I was, okay, I've got to get a taxi, no matter what the cost. So the hotel people wouldn't help. So I just went out to the taxi place in front of the hotel and I banged on their window. And I saw that someone was hiding in the back. So I just kept banging. And then I saw they were Sikhs. And they were scared to death. And they just yelled out, no taxi, very dangerous. We're Sikhs, big problem. And so I just begged, please, I beg you, get me a Hindu driver. And so somehow or another, they arranged this driver that looked like he was about 13 years old. But I just knew I had to go with him. So he was also scared to death. But I urged him, just go fast out of Delhi, and he did. So I felt relieved once we were out of the city precincts, and I was exhausted from a long journey. So I lay down in the back seat, and I was feeling relieved. We got out of Delhi, and then suddenly I saw flames shooting up into the sky. So I jumped up, what the heck? And what I saw was a truck on the side of the road that was completely engulfed in flames. And I wondered, what could possibly have caused such a fire? It was puzzling. And I'd never seen anything like that before. So anyway, I just laid back down. And a little later, again, I saw flames shooting up into the sky. And I jumped up and I saw the same sight, another truck completely ablaze. And I was like, oh my God. I realized what was happening. You know, these trucks, you know, they were operated by Sikhs, generally. So the revenge for Indira Gandhi's death had begun. And now I was terrified. Hare Krishna, chanting like crazy, because I knew anything could happen. So I just sat up and chanted strongly. And we made it pretty far, and then suddenly I saw a roadblock ahead. A mob, an angry mob, that clearly were planning to stop our car. And that poor little driver, he was terrified. And I yelled at him, don't stop, go fast. You stop, we're dead. And, you know, but then I saw he started to slow down, and I actually beat him on the back, go, go, go. And then he realized, okay, so he put his foot to the pedal, and he just sped towards the mob, and they were forced to step aside, and we just barreled through, you know, and we made it to Vrindavan. But there, everyone was scared, because now we heard that there was some talk that, you know, Americans were involved in this murder, and we just knew that there, you know, anything could happen, you know, just craziness. And there was nowhere that we could run. There's nowhere we could go, you know. And I remember talking to a friend about what we should do if a mob attacks the temple. And we decided that we would go up on the roof and climb up the water tank and lay flat on top of it, or maybe even climb inside it. We had our plan. But fortunately, it didn't come to that. But a few other devotees who had been in Delhi arrived. They were also coming from Delhi. One of them was a German devotee who had been stopped by a mob. He was pulled out of the car and he was beaten until he's like showing his passport. No, I'm German. You know, eventually somehow they let him go. But Vidya, she had just picked up her elderly parents who had, I don't think they'd ever been out of America, what to speak, in India for the first time in their life. And they, unfortunately, took the Taj Express, that 7 o'clock train and they just witnessed horrific things. Mobs jumping on the train, running through the cars, killing Sikhs or throwing them off violently off the train. Vidya's mother, she had some scissors, and there was a Sikh man, she was just cutting his beard off, trying to help him. Oh God, they witnessed unbelievable brutality. They were totally traumatized. Again, you know, why am I telling these stories? What does it have to do with Krishna consciousness? Well, you know, these are real life experiences that, you know, they really showed the nature of the human being. Just scratch the surface, and there is an animal there, ready to bite, ready to attack. And it was clear, you know, that most of these mobs, they were young people. I mean, did they love Indira Gandhi? I doubt it. It was just the match that lit the flame of the frustration and anger that was within their hearts. And it was just any opportunity to just lash out in anger, whether innocent or not, you know. So to witness such things, one gets some practical realization of really how truly dangerous this world is. Anyway, no, I just have to tell these things because it's just part of life. What we learn things through life experiences, and this was a very telling, quite shocking experience. But I also, on a more positive note, I wanted to mention something which was very spiritually nourishing for me around this time during my trips to Vrindavan in the early 2000s. There was a devotee couple from Los Angeles who had purchased a plot of land in Sant Colony, which is close by Krishna Balaram Temple, and they were planning to build a home there for their later years. But while in Los Angeles, they were still there, and both of them were taking a nap one morning, and both of them had the same dream at the same time. And a sadhu came to them and said, "Don't build on this plot. I am in samadhi here. Don't disturb us." And so, of course, that was pretty surprising and probably scary. So, they found out a little the history of the plot, and they came to understand that this area was called Sant Colony because it was a place where many saints used to live. So it was highly likely that there were some samadhis in that area. So they decided to heed the sadhu's warning. Rather than build a home, they would develop the area as a meditative space. And so, long story short, not long after this, the husband became ill and he departed this world. Very, very glorious, wonderful devotee. And so his wife decided to create a memorial for him on their property, as well as this meditative space that she would develop as a Padasevanam park. And so over time, she arranged to build all these, I think they were cow dung and mud, seats, one after another around the wall, for all of our main acharyas. And it was a very simple place and very quiet and meditative, especially Kartik when things are hectic. It was a beautiful place to offer a candle and have kirtan. And so this was frequently a shelter for us. My daughter used to come with me to Vrindavan, and we loved to go there. And I mention this again just because life is moving on, and I realize more and more over time that as our society grows more and more, as things get built up more and more busy, sometimes hectic, noisy, I have felt a real need to find a way to be in a more nourishing meditative space and practice, more intimate, more focused, and less people. Now, not everyone has this need, but I think many do, and also children may need. Because we want our society to grow, but we also have to try to keep it personal, to make sure to provide facilities that will enhance our devotional life. I think such places will be more and more necessary over time. So this beautiful little place, it really worked for us for some time. And sometimes as our society grows, we have to find for ourselves the things and the people and the places that will continue to nourish us and to keep us inspired. And I feel if we have a strong desire, Krishna will provide what we need. I wonder, yes, I think I can go on for a little while still. Back to life in Mayapur. Of course, one thing that happened, I think, in this year, Radhe Shyam was installed in Alachua, and I had had them made in Jaipur. So it's always wonderful to hear when the worship is begun, because we've seen from these big blocks of marble how the deities manifest and then become the focus of devotion for so many devotees. And this is so fulfilling. You could see the devotees in Alachua, they just fell in love with Radhe Shyam. So beautiful. Anyway, another thing that happened that actually this was early 2000, I think, was the first presentation given to the GBC body by female devotees. How this came about was due to the determination and the dedication of Sudharma Dasi, who's just a wonderful, caring devotee. And throughout the 90s, women's issues had been more and more raised at various times and places, and Sudharma had shown dedication to this cause, and she was thus elected as an executive officer for ISKCON North America. And so that entitled her to attend the GBC meetings. I think Malati also had been recommended as a candidate for the GBC around this time, so both of them started to attend the GBC meetings. And not sure which year, but Sudharma had already begun a Vaishnavi ministry, which was trying to arrange for positive association and uplifting training and association for Vaishnavis, So now Sudharma was repeatedly, each year she requested the GBC that they should examine the situation of women in ISKCON. But somehow or another that was postponed year after year. So then in '99 in Vrindavan, a kind of unpleasant event took place. There was some altercation between the men and the women in front of Radhe Shyam's altar. There was some pushing each other, where people should stand for darshan, and it caused a lot of agitation throughout the society. So as a result, the women's topic was put onto the table for the GBC meetings in 2000. The GBC wasn't particularly keen on it, and actually neither were most of the ladies keen on giving presentations. But Sudharma was really determined that if the GBC is supposed to lead the movement, which is, half women, they should get some feedback from the ladies. And so a number of senior ladies flew into Mayapur: Jamuna, Vishaka, Rukmini, Sodamani, Kusha, Urmila, Pranada, I think that was it. I think that's, and these were all just wonderful devotees, really wonderful Vaishnavis, So before the meetings, they had their own, they met together, to discuss what they should say, what they wanted to say. And although I wasn't a named presenter, but I was in Mayapur and I was close friends with many of them, so they asked me to listen to what they intended to present and hear their presentations, give some feedback. Maybe there were some others there also, I don't remember. Just how does it sound when we speak? So everyone spoke wonderfully and had really, interesting things to say. But I just felt that they might not realize that many of the GBC, many of the GBC body really, they didn't really know the purpose of this talk or what the need for it was. And it was likely that many of them didn't really understand our intentions. And so I guess I stuck my foot in my mouth by explaining those things, because they, hearing that, what I said, they said, yeah, actually, that's true. So maybe why don't you give a little introduction to explain our intentions and, set a little bit the context for the talks. So I found that to be a challenging request, but I did feel it was needed. So I tried my best to put something together, and I'm going to read what I said. I wrote it down. I think I just read it out. But I would encourage anyone listening to this, take the time to listen to all the presentations given, because each of the talks was truly excellent and enlightening and gives a lot of unknown history that people should know. And I'm pretty sure you can find it just with a Google search or on the Vaishnavi Ministry website. But all of the ladies, I mean, really, they just spoke respectfully, intelligently, philosophically, and just beautifully. So it was an important event. Now, on the day that we all filed into the GBC conference room together, we took our seats at one end of the long table. It was interesting just to watch the men as they entered. I noticed that many of them didn't make eye contact with us, and that often they took their seats at the farthest end of the table away from where we were. And then, of course, there were some that just didn't attend the meeting, so they were kind of conspicuous by their absence. And there were a few who sat on the edge, chanting and sometimes talking to each other throughout the presentation. And all of that I thought was quite telling. It just seemed to indicate a general reluctance to hear us, or, I don't know, fear or disinterest or discomfort. Hard to say, maybe many different things. But there didn't appear to be a lot of eagerness to hear. Anyway, during the, I'm trying to remember. I'm just picturing what it was like. A number of things happened during the meeting, just remembering that during the presentation, I noticed one devotee was looking at his computer the whole time, and while another sannyasi, he never looked at us, and he was just fidgeting the whole time, and his foot was shaking the whole time. And I actually felt kind of sorry for him, and I thought he must be struggling with something. It's just not normal. And later, much later, it seemed that came out that was true. So I don't know. If you want to call us mother, then you should accept that sometimes a mother can tell when a son has a problem. For this reason, it might be useful to have a woman or two on the sannyas approval board. But anyway, it was interesting to see the reactions. Of course, I'm not saying everyone was like this. Some of the members were very, very kind and very attentive. And especially there were two devotees who were very supportive to sannyasis. Both of them walked into the room and immediately, looked at us, smiled, made eye contact, and took their seats right next to us and, started to engage in some light, pleasant conversation. Not surprising, this was Radhanath Swami and Bhakti Tirtha Swami. So there was also a very, very nice mood among some of them. So anyway, I'm just going to read the talk that I gave. I found it online. And so that you can get, so this is just like an introduction. And I really recommend that you try to listen to all of these presentations. They're very, brilliant and very informative. Okay, so this is what I said. I will just put that up and read it to you. Many of you may be wondering what this woman's presentation is all about. So before setting the scene, I would like to assure you what this presentation is not about. It's not about promoting feminism. It's not about disregarding Vedic culture. It's not about accusing or complaining or blaming. It's not about women versus men. So this is what it's not about. But what it is about is looking at ISKCON's social history, specifically from the female perspective. For if we cannot clearly understand mistakes of the past, we cannot successfully move forward to a healthy future. I would like to read a portion of an article written by Thomas Hopkins in ISKCON Communications Journal, where he describes the importance of ISKCON studying its own history. This quote, "There is a tendency in ISKCON today to look on Prabhupada and his teachings as a source of proof texts for ad hoc policies and decisions, rather than try to understand him and the tradition in which he stood more systematically. In what may seem a paradoxical way, it may be necessary to pay less attention to specific statements that Prabhupada made in order to preserve the vitality of what he stood for." Prabhupada himself was constantly changing, not in his essential beliefs and devotional relation to Krishna, but in the decisions he made to meet new circumstances and take advantage of new opportunities. Prabhupada was a living person, and it was his personal application of devotional principles that gave life to ISKCON, rather than any one teaching or even the whole body of his teachings. Nevertheless, it is his teachings and the memory of his living presence that ISKCON now has to rely upon, along with, and he would certainly be the first to say this, the guidance of Krishna. So how does one use these properly to keep ISKCON a vital tradition? The answer certainly is not to use them in bits and pieces to support decisions made for more materialistic or egocentric reasons. It is rather to approach Prabhupada, his teachings, and the tradition in which he stood, the tradition of Chaitanya Vaishnavism, as mediated through earlier scriptures and the teachings of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, in a more systematic manner, to provide a dialogue with the past on behalf of the future. The purpose of studying ISKCON history is to maintain a continuous check of the present against the core values and essential doctrines of the larger tradition and the spirit of the founder. It is, in other words, to keep the bright light of trained and devout attention on the way the Lord's human agents are presenting his teachings and managing his affairs. So this presentation that the ladies are about to share with you, this is about sharing our realizations and experiences of the last 30 years. It's about generating deeper understanding between leaders and the people they lead. It's about seeking balance and working towards social sanity. And it's about expressing our love and concern for Srila Prabhupada and his movement. And it is about protecting Srila Prabhupada's legacy for future generations, because we're not all going to be around for so much longer. Addressing the difficulties in our human relationships. This is not exclusively a woman's issue. We all suffer due to the lack of deep, loving relationships, and the fragmentation of our society is proof of this. And we have a long way to go in living our philosophy. And it's also, these presentations are also about encouraging a shift in emphasis from buildings and institutional concerns to emphasizing the importance of appreciating and valuing and encouraging all individual devotees. So finally, I would just like to humbly request that during these presentations, we all try to step out of our own autobiography, to set aside our own glasses and really try to see the ISKCON world through the eyes of others. Just make it an exercise in empathic listening, in trying to understand. For not seeking to understand is going to lead to judgment and rejection and manipulation. Whereas seeking to understand will lead to understanding and acceptance and participation. We really have no other choice to survive in these difficult times. We must focus on what unites us, not what divides us. So that was mine, and then we went on and listened to many wonderful presentations, and many were really touched, very touched by these presentations. And Madhusevita was the chairman that year, and he understood it was important to keep this conversation, that he extended the time allotted graciously so that we could speak everything and get some response. And at the end of it all, as the chairman, Madhusevita Prabhu, he suggested, he said, well, wouldn't it be nice if Yamuna could give class the next morning? It was just a nice gesture. So Yamuna, she politely declined, and she said, well, I would love to sing Jai Radha Madhava, but I'm the singer. Vishaka's the scholarly one, so why don't you have Vishaka give class, and I will sing Jai Radha Madhava. So then that was agreed. Okay, that sounds good. Now this news, who knows how it spread so quickly, but within minutes, a highly placed Indian manager came right into the GBC meeting and said outright, this cannot happen here in Mayapur. We'll be a laughing stock amongst the Gaudiya Math circles. Now, fortunately, this was a time when my husband was still acting as co-director, and so he had heard about it, and he came and he just stopped the whole discussion, and he said, no, we can discuss this later. Let's just let the GBC go on. And they did meet later, and it was a long discussion, but my husband managed to keep the class schedule intact despite opposition. Amazing, isn't it? Anyway, the next morning was also very telling. There were many leaders, sannyasis, missing from the usual front row seats in the temple room, so just hadn't come. And when Yamuna started to sing, someone pulled the plug out of the microphone. I mean, she was so absorbed that she didn't even notice it. She was just singing. And things were not set up properly as normal But eventually, Vishaka went ahead and gave the class. And my husband said, well, that was the best class of the whole festival, But for me, the best part of all of that was that we had this wonderful association of so many great God sisters all together. We spent time together. And I especially got to know Jamuna more. And we became close. And, we were determined to remain in touch, which we did. And so that was a huge plus for me over the years to have that association. So to finish up, I think I should stop. This is getting long. But the results of the meeting were positive. It was a beginning. There were GBC resolutions that were positive. I was going to read them out, but it's quite long. And but basically, it was favorable. There were acknowledgement that the women's voices had not been heard, and so that it was resolved that that the women should be encouraged in a variety of ways, and there were some guidelines put into place that GBC and zonal secretaries and temple presidents and leaders, they were requested to coordinate with the women's ministry, to invite senior devotee women, especially Srila Prabhupada direct disciples, to visit their temples and to provide their association and to help in training younger devotees. There are many things that were written up. I think there was some, basic kind of put into law that ISKCON temples are to allow all qualified devotees, regardless of gender, to speak Srimad Bhagavatam or any classes, and that all ISKCON temples should designate at least, half of the temple room area for ladies, and that the management, in particular temple, if any of them feel that they're unable to implement these proposals, then they need to work with the Vaishnavi ministry to, so there was positive results from it. And there was pushback about these things the next year. And there wasn't a real lot of follow-through on incorporating everything outlined by the GBC, but definite progress was made, and women did start to be more frequently invited to give classes in some places, not everywhere. But I think I should end here. This has gone, it's quite a long talk. So let's close. We didn't get so far into the 2000s, but I'll try to be more quick going through things in the next talk. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.